And aloha, welcome to our show today. We're live now. There was a little bit of a technical glitch here. It's Monday, January 25th, 2016, start of a brand new week. We've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Tom is in our control room, and he's going to be answering the phones when you call on in. Now, getting back to the stories here, the American media is totally focused on the presidential campaigns and other issues, including that major storm. They couldn't pretend that was not happening. But there's a lot going on that you should be paying attention to. We're seeing the situation over in Syria begin to escalate. Erdogan is out there stating that Turkey will not tolerate the Russian buildup in northern Syria. Well, Russia is in northern Syria at the request of Syria's legitimate government. And the reason Erdogan is angry about it is they have shut down a significant portion of the ISIS oil convoys that are taking stolen Syrian oil into Turkey. Erdogan's son is brokering it. It's being shipped out to the world through an ocean port that Goldman Sachs owns 1/3 of the interest on and is therefore getting 1/3 of the shipping, harbor fees rather. And this is hitting Erdogan in his wallet. So he's all upset. It's all Russia's fault. I'm not making the... I apparently can't because I'm here. Okay, I have an open studio, open mic in the control room. Okay. Now then, getting on back to the situation in Syria, we know that the CIA, Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, had a program to supply weapons to ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria. And we also know that Saudi Arabia has been giving a lot of money to the so-called moderate rebels in Syria. And now, according to this article that we're seeing over at antiwar.com, the two programs are much more closely linked together and coordinating than was previously known. And again, all of this is a program. They want to get Bashar al-Assad out. They want to put a U.S. puppet government in. And it has dragged on for almost 5 years. Now, at present, the talks between Damascus and Syria's political opposition will start January 29th. Now, the peace talks are going to focus on a ceasefire and stopping ISIS and the other Western-backed terrorist groups. So as a result, ISIS and al-Nusra and all of these other manufactured groups are not invited to the talks. They're not Syrian people. 90% of the Free Syria Army are not from Syria. They're hired mercenaries. There is no reason for hired mercenaries and hired terrorists to be part of a process to bring peace into Syria. Now, the U.S. and Turkey are already making noises. They're going to invade Syria when the peace talks fail. They're absolutely going to do it. Joe Biden is out there saying it's time for a U.S. military intervention in Syria. They've been saying that for 4 years now. Assad's gassing his own people. Assad has a Death Star. We have to put boots on the ground. Not their own kids, of course. Now, in an article in Press TV, James Jatras, a former U.S. Senate foreign policy analyst, is saying that the indications are the U.S. is going to do everything they can to sabotage the coming peace talks. They're going to go on in there and just try and keep it from happening because they don't want any peace in Syria that keeps Assad as the head of the government. They want him out. They want to put a new replacement in there, somebody who will do what they're told by the United States. So they're still playing this game. This covert overthrow regime change game, even though the whole world now sees what the U.S. government has been doing. Okay? There's a report out of Global Research up in Canada saying that the United States and Turkey have already begun a ground invasion of Syria based on the U.S. commandeering of this Syrian airfield without the permission of the government of Syria. And Turkey is rolling the tanks up to the border. They're ready to go. They want to have their war, and they don't care if you understand it's all based on fraud. They just don't care anymore. They are that desperate for the war. Not going good, though, for ISIS and Al-Qaeda. The Russian Air Force just destroyed the largest ISIS camp in East Hama, which included significant stockpiles of rockets and ammunition. The Russians are showing what can be done when you're really trying to go after ISIS. The problem is the U.S. has been claiming to go after ISIS, but actually going after Syrian infrastructure. Same game they were playing in Iraq. And we're already seeing these articles coming out from like Russia Today that we're probably going to see more American boots on the ground in Iraq. This will be what? The the fourth invasion of Iraq now, because they can't get those pesky Iraqis to realize they're conquered, and they have to do what the U.S. says. Meanwhile, in a stunning display of hypocrisy, the White House is expressing deep concern with the rising civilian death toll in Yemen. They're really concerned. Well, there's a way to solve that. Tell your lapdog Saudi Arabia to stop killing all those people. Meanwhile, we're getting another report out of Lively that the Saudi American Coalition Air Force is destroying historical archaeological sites in Yemen. They're just blowing them up, reducing them to rubble. This is a continuation of a pattern we're seeing across the Middle East, where all of these invaded nations are having their ancient archaeological sites destroyed, obliterated. And the reason they're doing that, as I've theorized before, Israel uses archaeology for political purposes to justify its ownership of the Holy Lands. But there's hardly anything there, and most of that has been misinterpreted, a lot of it outright frauds, like the temple pomegranate and the Jehoash tablet, which were revealed as frauds. It's embarrassing for Israel to claim there's this mythical history of David and Solomon, and there's nothing to show for it. But if you were walking through Egypt or Iraq or Yemen or any place else, you can't go 2 steps without tripping over the hard proof of their ancient history. And so Israel needs all these other archaeological sites to be destroyed to level the playing field and make it less obvious that there is nothing supporting Israel's claimed ancient history. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're talking about what's going on over in the war zones today. Ukraine is getting ready to lodge lawsuits with the international courts against Russia regarding Crimea. Now, we're starting to see this. Kiev, I think, has realized they cannot prevail militarily, so they're embarking on a technique that Israel loves to use. It's called lawfare. Take them to court, wear them down with legal fees. We know that Kiev is trying to sue Gazprom under some anti-monopoly laws for pretty much exactly the same amount Kiev currently owes Gazprom for natural gas. Now Kiev is going to take Russia to the international courts over Crimea. Still going along with this idea that somehow Russia came in and stole Crimea from them, which is not what happened. Crimea held a referendum saying we wish to secede from Ukraine. They're allowed to do that under the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which guarantees self-determination to all people. If you don't like the country you're in, break off and start a new one. That's their right. And every nation that's a member of the United Nations acknowledges that right when they sign up. But Poroshenko doesn't have enough bombs, but he's sure stocking up on lawyers right now. Russia has countered not only this lawfare approach, but the belligerent talk coming out of NATO, saying that they may start stationing forces in Crimea just in case there's an attempt by NATO to grab it. And we know NATO wants to grab Crimea. One of the major reasons for the U.S.-backed coup d'etat in Kiev in early 2014 was to kick Russia out of Crimea, to deny it a port on the Black Sea, to get Russia out of the Black Sea entirely. And they still want to be able to do that. But with Crimea a part of the Russian Federation, there is no way that they can deny Russia access and freedom of navigation in the Black Sea. So stealing back Crimea would change that. Now then, speaking of the coup d'etat, a story is surfacing regarding a lady named Julia Tymoshenko, who is this very lovely young lady who'd been thrown into prison for corruption by the previous government of Ukraine. And there was a huge story about how she was, abused by Yanukovych, who was a kleptomaniac, and he was this and he was that, and she was suffering in prison. She was on the verge of being tortured. Well, Der Spiegel has done a little research and found out that the entire mass media, corporate media, image of this woman was a fake manufactured by a public relations company. was a total con job, just like the Kuwaiti nurse and the stolen Kuwaiti incubators was manufactured by public relations firm Hill & Knowlton. That's what public relations is. It's a polite word for we're going to lie to the people on behalf of a well-paying client. And this lady, Yulia, turns out to be an absolutely total fake. She's the Ukrainian version of Hillary Clinton. Ukrainian forces have moved 13 tanks to the contact line with the Lugansk People's Republic. They're trying to start a conflict there. They're trying to drag Russia in because nothing is going to save the U.S. economy like a war with Russia. No, it isn't. The conventional wisdom is that it will, because look how well the U.S. made out of big mistake number 1 and big mistake number 2. Actually, that's not even accurate to say. The bankers made out great in those wars. Bankers always make out great in wars, and everybody else suffers, even on the winning side. They're plunged into debt. It takes them forever to rebuild. Another article coming on out of Russia today, Ukraine's dead ends, basically saying Poroshenko's government is running out of options. Their economy is in trouble. Their domestic political situation is very unstable. Europe is unwilling to invest any more money in what appears to be a losing proposition. And irony of irony, Poroshenko, if he's going to stay in power, may soon have no other choice but to make a deal with Moscow, which means after the U.S.-backed coup in 2014 and all the blood and suffering and bombing of all this time, Ukraine is still going to wind up in the Russian sphere of influence. This is a major U.S. foreign policy screw-up. There's no other way to describe it. And the U.S. is not making any friends over there in Ukraine. As it turns out, there is a U.S. biological weapons laboratory located in Donbas, and somebody there dropped a beaker, releasing a new manufactured virus, which so far is immune to all medications. It's obviously weaponized. 20 Ukrainian soldiers have died. Over 200 soldiers are currently hospitalized. Maybe they dropped a beaker. Maybe they're just going ahead and using biological warfare, which is a war crime. Joint Chiefs Chairman, U.S. looking to attack ISIS in Libya. Really, we're not attacking the people of Libya because they tried to kick out our puppet ruler. No, we're going after ISIS. We're going after... Really, everywhere we go, it's always about ISIS. And this is getting dangerous because Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is trying to fast-track a new authorization for the use of force bill that will allow President Obama to unleash U.S. military assets against anywhere on the globe that they can claim ISIS is located, including on U.S. soil itself. No, we're not shooting all the bloggers in the independent media. They're ISIS. They're ISIS. We have the authorization to kill anybody that we think is ISIS. It's really very transparent to anybody with their eyes open. Right now, I think Washington's propaganda machine is playing to the gallery, to the people whose livelihood and paychecks depend on the federal government, the true believers. For the rest of us, we see the fraud. John Kerry is out there announcing that the fight with Netanyahu is over. Obama is going to visit the Israeli embassy. He actually showed up. He's going to deliver remarks for International Holocaust Remembrance Day. I forget when that's being held. And then he's on his way to Tel Aviv. So once again, the U.S. government has been delivered back into the clutches of the true masters of the world, mighty Israel. Now, over in Great Britain, things are getting very interesting there. They're coming up on their referendum for the Brexit, and it is a major, major fight going on. UKIP leader Nigel Farage has launched a new cross-party platform working for a Brexit. And he's out there saying, this isn't racism, we love Europe, we just think Britain should make the decisions for the British people. Common sense to me. And there's a lot of support for a Brexit. Cameron, of course, is on the other side, trying to sell Britain back into the slavery of the European Central Bank, to the point where he's gagged his own government. They're not allowed to say anything bad about becoming part of the European Union. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And a quick little technical note. We're going to turn the phone lines on my show off for a short while. What happened earlier today at the beginning of the show is Dan was supposed to be doing my show, and apparently he got stuck out on the roads in all that human-caused global warming that's been piling up across the country. But he is on his way in, and they're very short-staffed in the control room. So we're going to turn our phone lines off for the moment because I've got a lot of stuff to talk about anyway. When Dan gets here, we'll turn the lines back on. So if you're calling and you can't get through, that's why. We're just trying to adapt to a difficult situation, as it were. Now then, the Chinese President Xi is over in Tehran, welcomed by Iranian President Hassan Rouhani, and they're shaking hands. This is like the first visit by a Chinese head of state to Iran in 14 years. Now that the sanctions have been lifted, they're all playing, let's make a deal. We're going to buy and we're going to sell and we're going to have trade and we're all going to do very, very well, which, of course, is not what the U.S. wants to hear. The U.S. wants all the world to trade through the United States so the U.S. can get a little piece of that action. They're not happy about that. Now, President Xi did not quite have the same warm reception down in Saudi Arabia. He was expecting to meet with a Saudi crown prince who's also in charge of the country's domestic security. He's interior minister. And the meeting didn't happen. And it's being blamed on internal differences and rivalries between Mohammed bin Nayef and his deputy Mohammed bin Salman, who's the king's son, and is angling to possibly be the next king of Saudi Arabia, given that the current king of Saudi Arabia can't even remember that he's in Saudi Arabia from day to day. And this tells us that the government of Saudi Arabia is very weak right now. It's fractured. It's factionalized. Not exactly a kind of country you want to be using as a proxy to go into places like Yemen, is it? Interesting little article came out of Liberty Fight talking about how Time Life is covering the possibility that Israel was behind 9/11, or at least took part in it. And the phone lines are now open if you want to call in. And it's interesting because they said this Time Life magazine, Modern Day Conspiracy Theories, I saw it on the newsstand. And they're going through basically an overview of all that we've been talking about and took a more even hand on it than might be expected. They're having to acknowledge that a lot of people know what's going on. And they can't go back to that insulting, you're all wackos and kooks, when you look at how many people are actually studying all of this information. And in fact, there was an article out of Liberty Fight looking at their system logs. At the article, Israel did 9/11. They're getting millions of hits. And they're not just from wacko, cuckoo type people. Some of the people visiting Liberty Fight, U.S. State Department, Harvard University, U.S. Department of the Interior, the Boeing Corporation, Capital One Financial Corporation, the U.S. Department of Defense Network, the state of Utah, the Alaska State Government, Navy Network Information Center, Moody's Investors, Eastman Kodak, Wells Fargo and Company, Dean Witter Financial, IBM, the city of Dallas, Texas, Cedars-Sinai Health Systems, County of Riverside, the state of Kansas, the U.S. Postal Service, MGM Mirage in Las Vegas, and on and on and on. There's a whole huge list of these. Now, not all of them are necessarily nefarious, because people inside the government are trying to find out what's going on. I have people who visit my site that are from government domains, yet it's very obvious they're just reading for their own edification. They're not out there trying to cause harm or anything. Meanwhile, Israel is in a bit of a panic because of all the revelations getting on out there about all the things they've done throughout the years. They were behind the kidnapping that led to the raid on Entebbe, the attack on the USS Liberty, constant war crimes against the Palestinians, more land grabs, wars against Lebanon. It just goes on and on and on. And the growing number of people who recognize that Israel thrives on the false flag attack, and that does include 9/11. Now, I don't think Israel did it all by themselves because of the way the Secret Service did not act around President Bush down there at that Booker Elementary School in Sarasota, Florida. It was a partnership between the U.S. government and Israel, but they're equally guilty. But Israel's in a panic. Already out there, they're trying to wag the Nazis again. We're going to wag the Nazis. We found another Nazi. See, Israel's got a real problem. They're running out of Nazis because they're all dying off. But they got one. Got a guy named Hubert. He's 95 years old, and he's going to be put on trial in Germany as an accessory to 3,681 murders at Auschwitz. The guy was a paramedic. The entire prosecution case against this man is that he knew what was going on in there. He knew there was an extermination program. They can't prove that, by the way, because they can't even prove there was an extermination program. And because he willingly went there, that makes him an accessory. No, he was a military officer. And military people tend to go where they're told to go. I mean, this case is flimsy to the point of damp tissue. But they're going forward with this because they've got to wag the Nazis to remind us all of why we have to feel sorry for Israel and give them our money and let our children be killed in Israel's wars across the globe. It is a little sick. Story coming out of Blacklisted News. The Pentagon has absolutely no clue how many weapons it has lost to ISIS or given them on the sly. Nobody knows where it went. The U.S. and Iraq governments cannot say how much U.S. supplied material, paid for by your tax dollars, got sent to these terrorist groups. They can't even say how it got there. Actually, had the consulate in Benghazi in Libya not burned to the ground, I think we would have known exactly how these U.S. supplied weapons got to ISIS and Al-Qaeda. That's why they let the place burn to the ground. That's why the stand-down order. They needed the place absolutely eradicated. Another story coming out of no less than the New York Times taking the F-35 to task about how much it's going to cost, how poorly it is performing. And they're out there quoting Lieutenant General Christopher Bogdan, the Air Force officer in charge of the F-35. He's still in support of the program. Of course, he gets paid a lot of money to manage the thing. But he has acknowledged that because of the complexity of this aircraft, there are going to be a lot of problems with it. It's trying to be all things to all people and winds up not being very good at any of them. Little embarrassment down in Louisiana. Truck flipped over on the highway, dumped its cargo on the road, and the police showed up and took everybody's cell phone cameras because the cargo on the truck scattered all over the road were Tomahawk cruise missiles, which, yes, they have to get shipped from where they're made to where they're going to be stored or deployed. And by the way, those Tomahawk cruise missiles, I think they go for $1 million a pop. So that was like a $10, $20 million accident on the road. All right, let's get into the economy now. As you probably already heard, the Dow was in the red most of the day. They tried to shove it up, almost got into the green, and then in the last hour and a half, it started down. It closed 208 down. They're not going to be able to keep this illusion going much longer because everybody knows the market is being rigged. They're not following the trend is my friend wisdom any longer. They're selling the rallies. That's what happened today. There was a rally, got almost to the green, and everybody said, okay, time to get out. And they bailed on out. All right, we're going to take a break for commercials. When we come on back, more about the economy and the numbers. Again, they're not looking very good. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to our show here. And a reminder, the phone lines are now open. Dan is in our control room, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Getting on back to the economy, you've probably been hearing in the corporate media about how China's to blame for the horrible economy. China's downturns dragging the rest of us down. Oh, China's economy is in serious trouble. Actually, the final numbers are in. China's economy grew 6.9% in 2015. Now, that may be an exaggerated figure, but even if it only grew half that much, that's doing very well in current times. But remember, as a class of human beings, politicians and money junkies never accept responsibility for their mistakes, crimes, corruptions, goofs. They're always going to take credit for anything good that happens, even if they had nothing to do with it. Anything bad that happens, they're going to find a scapegoat. Oh, that clerk in the cubicle on the far left, all the way over by the restrooms, he messed up. It's all his fault. Take him away to jail. That's how they do it. Paris is now on the side of lifting the anti-Moscow sanctions. They're setting a timeline of the summer, and they want to go back to doing business with Russia because France, like all of Europe, paid a heavy price going along with these anti-Russian sanctions. They're getting sick and tired of all this U.S. global domination because the more they go along with it, the more they suffer. There's no positive reinforcement to go along with what the U.S. wants anymore. It's all negative. There's no carrot, only the stick. Bad management technique. Article over in the New York Times again. Too big to fail banks thriving on Wall Street. And it's a critical article talking about how all these Wall Street financial firms are paying $200 billion in fines and so forth. But nobody gets to go to jail. None of the senior executives behind these frauds ever go to jail except for one exception, Karim Sarageldin, who was a senior trader at Credit Suisse. He gets out of jail in March. Now, the New York Times errs on one part. The banks are not thriving. They are being propped up with a flood of low-cost money created out of thin air by the Federal Reserve, which destroys the value of the money you already worked for, have in your pocket, have in your savings account, have buried in the mayonnaise jar out by the pineapple plantation. In a very real way, they are robbing you to keep themselves alive. And I'm not the only person saying that. Another article coming out of Investment Watch blog. Thanks to the Federal Reserve, economies all around the world are in a state of collapse. Remember that 11th marble? That's it. It's coming back. And it's grown to the size of the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs. Pensioners and savers particularly have faced huge headwinds since 2008 as their savings and pensions continue to disappear. In the world of negative interest rates and now bail-ins. The governments the banks have been authorized by the governments to literally help themselves to your savings account when they get into trouble. Now, a lot of people have been noticing how governments around the world, banks around the world, are dumping U.S. treasuries. And everybody's wondering, why is this not yet having a significant effect? Well, it goes back to a little-known financial institution in the United States of America called the Exchange Stabilization Fund. Now, this fund was created in 1934. A large part of its initial funding came from the gold confiscated from the American people by Franklin Roosevelt. The funds in the Exchange Stabilization Fund are the property of the American people. And this fund is above the law, it's above congressional oversight, it's even over the Federal Reserve. And this is the entity which is buying up Treasury bonds as fast as they can, using your money. And at some point, when those Treasury bonds finally collapse, it's going to be a lot of worthless paper dumped on you, the American people. Because we have to save those banks. Those poor banks, we've got to save them. Nobody has to save human beings. There's too many of those. Pearson, Barclays, and Virgin Media are announcing job cuts. Over in Tunisia, they've imposed a nationwide curfew on protests over unemployment. Meanwhile, Venezuela and Bahrain are among 15 countries that have been stripped of their voting rights at the United Nations due to unpaid membership fees. Now, isn't it interesting that the United Nations can punish little countries like Venezuela and Bahrain because their dues are not up to date, but refuses to do anything about Israel, which holds the world record for defying United Nations resolution, and failed to keep the two conditions placed on its membership: a Palestinian right of return, and if the Palestinians chose not to return, compensation for their stolen homes. Israel has complied with neither of those, and the United Nations does nothing about it. Alrighty, let's see. We're going to take a phone call here. Steve in Massachusetts, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I want to talk to you about the migrants in Europe.
Yes.
Now, I know you were discussing that last week and how you were saying they want to blur the lines. And it seems like they also want to create turmoil in the region as well.
Well, they're certainly succeeding at that.
Now, I was wondering, this is just a guess, but do you think there's like CIA, Mossad agents posed at migrants to create turmoil, to get more of a turmoil in there to get people all riled up?
Maybe if that's the agenda, but it's not like there needs to be any help over there. The problem is a lot of these people were lured to Europe with promises of free homes and free money, and they get there and they're left on their own. They're not getting what they were told they were going to get, and they're angry, and that's enough to trip off, all these crime sprees, the mass rapes, everything that's going on. These are very angry people. They made a very difficult, arduous journey, being told that they were going to be given a better life in Europe than what they left behind in the lands they came from, and they're not getting it. They're coming into the European society at the bottommost rung, and that's where they were back home. And so a lot of them are very, very angry. And yes, it's going to cause a lot of turmoil. And maybe the turmoil was intentional because anybody who thought that you were going to move this many people into other people's countries and not have friction, they were delusional. They obviously had an image we were all going to sit around holding hands and singing Kumbaya, and it's simply not happening.
Yeah, because I was thinking, they're coming in from war-torn countries, and you'd think they come in and try to be on the best behavior. And the people in Europe already didn't want them, and the migrants already pretty much didn't want to go there to begin with. So you got two factions going against each other, and it just seems like a conquer and divide strategy to me. Well,
again, the New World Order people really thought they were going to just pour all these migrants in and they were going to be absorbed and assimilated and it all was going to be well. But as I pointed out, if you look at the history of the United States back during its great immigration phase, give us your tired, your sick, your poor, your teeming masses struggling to breathe free, and it all sounds really good. But as these people came into the United States of America, they didn't blend in and assimilate. They formed their own little cultures everywhere they went. You go to any major American city, there's a Chinatown and a little Tokyo and a Koreatown and a little Italy. And our own history should have told people that this was not going to go very well for the Europeans.
Right, yeah. It just seems like a mess.
It is a mess. It's an absolute disaster. Okay?
Okay, well, thank you, Michael.
All right, thanks a lot for the phone call. We're going to let you go. Now then, story coming out of Investment Watch blog saying, look for the next correction to be triggered possibly by Deutsche Bank. Because, up there in Davos, the number of European Union companies that are issuing profit warnings is at the highest level since 2008. And Deutsche Bank last year lost 6 billion euros. They're in serious, serious trouble. It's not the first time we've been hearing about storm clouds over Deutsche Bank. If they go down, that is going to trigger a major correction. There are so many points of vulnerability to the global economy, and every one of them got started with that 11th marble. But the money junkies love the private central banking system because it gets them money and they don't have to give anything back for it. It's a form of economic slavery. Slavery is what it is. We'll be right back after the top of the hour news. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Pardon me, hour number 2. And we're still talking about the economy. We're going to be finishing up on that real quick here. Blacklisted News talking about the cashless society war intensifies during global apocalypse. Now, everybody who's out there pushing for a cashless society is saying this will end crime and terrorism and corruption because nobody will have anonymous cash. That's nonsense. This is going to be just like a gun ban or just like banning encryption. The criminals and terrorists will always have a medium of exchange, whether it's gold bullion or silver bullion. This is all about making sure that your money is forced to be in some bank somewhere so they can play games with it. That's all this is about. I honestly don't think it can work. Because, hypothetically, if you're driving across the American continent, there are a lot of out-of-the-way places you're going to want to do business with, gas stations and so forth. They're not all plugged into the Internet yet. And again, the reason I think this cashless society idea is doomed to fail is what are the politicians going to put in the G-strings of the strippers? I mean, come on. We've got to be practical here. We're going to take a phone call. Terry in Virginia, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael.
Hi.
How are you doing? I'm in Snowpocalypse.
Yes.
It's pretty interesting. It's really covered here. I've lived in this area for over 50 years, and I have never seen anything like this.
Okay.
Managed to get out of my driveway today, dug out with a dustpan. People laughed at me, but I got through it. Also, my 401k is worth less now than it was last April, and I've been putting money into it the whole time.
Yes.
So it's
welcome to modern America here. You know,
pretty terrifying.
It really is, and yet if you try and close your 401k, the IRS is going to come on down and say, we get most of it. You know.
Oh, I can't. I actually approached my boss about that. I work for a small privately owned business and said, can I roll it out? And it's like, not unless you quit your job.
Okay.
So I'm totally messed up here.
Well, join the 99% of us. I mean, we're all messed up here. I mean, the reason you had a dustpan is you didn't think to get a proper snow shovel because Al Gore's been telling us.
Actually, I have snow shovels, and
okay.
I'm 3 years old, and I can't get out there and hand shovels.
Oh, okay.
So the dustpan, hey, it was light as a feather. It was almost as big as a snow shovel, and I could just flick snow with a flick of a wrist. I'm not even that sore today, but I do hurt a little.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm sorry to hear that, but I'm getting pictures sent to me from all over the Eastern Seaboard, and now getting into the Midwest. People who are saying exactly the same thing. They have never seen as much snow as they're seeing right now in all their lifetimes. And
no, I was here for the blizzard of '66. I was a child in grade school, and we were out of school for 2 weeks. And I remember we were so excited about being out of school, and it got to the point where we just wanted to go back to school. It was getting so boring.
Yes.
But it's kind of like that here. They're managing to clear the main roads. My private little street I can look out my backyard and see the main drag through my neighborhood. It's been plattered. It's down to blacktop. I have a Subaru, so I got out today and went to my office and checked voicemail and stuff because I'm in property management, and people are having trouble. There's ice dams on their houses, and water's starting to leak in, and gutters are falling off, and it's
anybody who didn't leave those outside faucets dripping a little bit, they're going to have cracked pipes.
Yep, we got that to deal with. But the temperature warmed up today, so we're not dealing with frozen. We're dealing with just way too much snow.
Yes.
Way too much. Never seen anything like it. Dug it out. Well, you have a good one.
All right, I certainly will. And remember, all that white stuff that you're seeing around you, Al Gore says it's your imagination.
I'm sure it is.
All right, thanks a lot for the phone call. We're going to let you go. Now, over in Great Britain, as you know, there's been a big stink over the license fees. British people have to pay a fee to access BBC. There's been one case where somebody said, I shouldn't have to pay if BBC is going to lie to us about World Trade Center 7 collapsing 26 minutes before it happened. And the judge actually agreed with him on that case. As part of their community service deal, up until now, people over the age of 75 get their TV for free as one of the benefits of being a pensioner. BBC is now saying they can't do that anymore. And they're saying that if all the pensioners over 75 were forced to buy licenses like everybody else, it would generate an additional £650 million worth of revenues for the BBC. Actually, no, it wouldn't. Probably most of those pensioners would turn off the TVs, get shortwave radios or something. And by the way, for those of you following the perils of BBC, their new incarnation of Top Gear, not doing very well. They're in serious, serious trouble. While everybody is waiting for the original Top Gear presenters and their new program coming out on Amazon TV, I think it's called Gear Shift, and I'm certainly going to be waiting to see what that happens. All righty, we have another caller on the line. This is Errol in the Netherlands, and he wants to respond to our previous caller. And no, I'm not fixing you up with her.
No, that is...
It's not that kind of a radio show.
No, I know. But I just want to say, my mother has been born in Österreich.
Yes.
it was part of, it was part of Germany at
Yes.
that time. So, what you see now, the so-called New World Order people have an agenda. And the funny thing is, Hitler came from Austria.
Yes.
And my mother told me we had snow as high as our windows and our doors, and we couldn't open it. We needed to lay under our blankets and eat our dry bread in the wartime. She was born in 1938,
Mm-hmm.
so she had made the war in 33. She was 5 and on the Flucht. She was also a refugee. And she told me that, and I find this ironic because the woman before called and she said, "We have never seen this snow before." Maybe this is a sign, like what you said. The new Nazis will be the American government.
I think so, because fascism knows no national boundary. Yes.
Ironic, isn't it?
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else?
Okay. No, that was it. And also the agenda, many got an agenda, but I think it's backfiring on them, and they need to learn to do business and not war.
I would agree with you on that one. I would agree with you on that one. They have
to do business.
The agenda has stumbled very, very badly for two reasons. One, they realized only too late how the availability of the internet and the independent media fundamentally changed the way information flows through society. They went into this program thinking that the propaganda tricks that worked in the 1950s and 1960s were still going to be effective. And the other great failing, and this has been a consistent problem all along, they don't think what they're doing all the way through to the end. It's a very sloppy analysis. They basically say, if we do this, Russia will do that, and that's the point at which they stop thinking. And they don't go on out and say, what are the ancillary effects of what we're about to do? Like when they sanctioned Russia and Europe suffered for it. They're not thinking these things through. Okay?
Exactly. They shoot themselves in the foot.
Yeah, in a very real way. And then they turn around and they shoot everybody else to cover it up. All right, Errol, I need to let you go.
Thank you.
Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, finishing up with the economic news here. Sports Authority is making noises that they may close up to 200 of their stores, which will mean layoffs of 20,000 people. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call. Ralph in New York City. Aloha, Ralph. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I love your show. You're awesome. You're beautiful. Very beautiful person. I love your show.
Thank you.
One question. Have you ever heard of a man named Gerald Salente from TrendsResearch.com?
Oh yeah, we post a lot of his material. We've had him on the show once.
Well, he was on the show talking about the economic crash. Same thing like you talk about. Also, do you think his trends are right on point like yours? Are y'all both on the same level headed the way things are going now?
Well, I think we're mostly in agreement. We may be looking at some of the fine details differently, but it doesn't really matter. At this point, you would be hard pressed to find anybody outside of Wall Street spokespeople or government spokesmen saying that the economy is doing well at all. And it appears they've lost their primary banner, which was that stock market always going up. Now they can't keep it up any longer. And with that banner, they can't wave that banner any longer. I think we're going to start seeing things accelerate.
And you also talked about the cashless society. Is that also, do you think that will be the same thing as Obamacare, as a cashless society, in your opinion?
I think it's going to be as badly botched as Obamacare. And I think most people are going to be very much opposed to a cashless society. It's one more intrusion into their privacy. If I walk into a convenience store and I got $20 in my pocket and I want to buy a magazine, I may not want anybody to know what magazine I'm buying. Could be Better Homes and Gardens. It's not manly for me to be looking at how to make doilies and stuff. But that's my business, and the government has no right, and the banks have no right knowing what I'm buying with my own money. But the real agenda for the cashless society is to prevent runs on the banks, which are going to start happening. And all they're going to do is they're going to say, well, look, we can't actually hand you any cash. All we can do is move your money to another bank. And, of course, that bank can then send it on back to try and keep things level. And I'll tell you this right now. When they declare the cashless society, they will at the same time ban private ownership of gold and silver investment coins. Otherwise, everybody would go down to their nearest coin dealer, swipe that little plastic, and take whatever's in their account home as silver and gold coins.
So you see, she predict if that happens, you will see riots in the inner cities, and anarchy and apathy in the society. If that really happens,
I think it could very well be the breaking point. And I'll tell you one more reason why I'm opposed to this cashless society. Okay, I am one of the people where when I'm going down to the supermarket or the post office, whatever, and I see somebody who's homeless, I'll give them some cash so that they can get a meal. What am I going to do? You know, with these homeless people don't have little plastic card terminals with them. Okay? And that is a significant part of the population right now. How are we going to feed these people if we can't give them a $10 bill?
Wow, that's amazing because I'm starting, because these people carry around, people living on fixed income like Social Security, disability, they get Medicaid, food stamps, and what's going to happen to these people if a cashless society goes into effect?
Well, I mean, all those people are already on plastic cards. That's why we don't actually see huge lines in front of soup kitchens during this depression, because they're all going into the supermarkets with their plastic cards. But there are segments of our society that are not going to be able to function in a cashless society. And I'm not talking criminals and terrorists. They're going to do just fine. I'm talking about the homeless and the hungry. Because we're not going to be able to give them $5 or $10 so that they can get a meal. They're going to be starving to death in the streets.
Exactly. That's what Bill Gates always talk about. I don't carry filthy hands with cash on me. He made that statement.
Well, I don't have to worry about that myself because germs couldn't live on the money I make.
Wow, it's amazing. It's amazing the way the elites sound like this because us little people got to go in the world,
They're living in a dream world. These are people who've never missed a meal. They've never known shortages. They're designing a system that works really great if everybody on Earth is a millionaire. But we're not. And that's where it's breaking down.
I live around white shoe boys here on Wall Street, around the stock market where I work at. They're walking around very arrogant and going around these upscale restaurants with their Rolls Royces and their Ferraris and walking around with some nice brunette blonde around them and I want to see the day this happens. What's going to happen to these people? Will they jump off them skyscrapers? I'm just kind of curious.
Well, maybe. I mean, they're either that or they're going to get tossed off. We've had a lot of strange investment banker deaths on Wall Street. Oh, it's always a suicide. Anyway, listen, Ralph, got to let you go.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you. We're going to switch over here to Kathy in Georgia. Aloha, Kathy. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, hi, Michael. I was just wondering, how are the criminals in Washington going to continue the drug trade without cash in this country?
That's another very, very good point. I mean, organized crime is a huge influence in this country, and they are a cash-based business.
So maybe there's hope that we can keep our cash just because of the criminal activity. I mean, it's kind of sad, but I kind of laugh about that. So maybe they're going to get caught up in their own web.
I'll tell you what's going to happen. If they try and ban cash, you're going to see local communities and neighborhoods. They're just going to print up their own currency as a medium of exchange to keep their life simple. There's no law that says you cannot have an alternate currency in circulation. The only reason they shut down the Liberty Dollar was because it was another form of out of the bank investment. And it's when they put Ron Paul's face on the dollar is when George Bush came down on him. I think his little ego got bruised. But you have, what they call community currencies, which are for local trade, the Maui dollar, the Catalina dollar, things like that. Dollar is not trademark property of the U.S. government. And when they make the conventional banking system too hard for people to use, people are just going to come up with their own alternative currencies. We're already seeing it start in some communities across America.
Right. Well, and another thing is, though, how are they going to compel people to turn in their gold and silver? That's the other thing. I mean, there's a lot of people that have coins from man, they've inherited them, and, there's people that are buying all different types of coins, even just ounces, ounces of silver that are just, stamped.
Well, you need to buy in small amounts because, unfortunately, starting a few years ago, coin dealers have to keep a record of large purchases, so they know whose door they need to kick down. And they could even, go into the more affluent neighborhoods and just walk from house to house with a metal detector and say, okay, we have a right to knock on your door and see if you've got any gold and silver. A large number of people would probably voluntarily comply. That was how Roosevelt did it. He just said, we have to do this. We have to save the banks. And most Americans turned in their gold at $25 an ounce, I think, is what they were compensated for. And looking at the gold price today, you understand how badly all those people got cheated by the U.S. government. Kathy, I have to let you go. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to go ahead right to the phones. We're going to talk to Frank in Pennsylvania. Aloha, Frank. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Thank you so much, Michael, for taking my phone call. You're right about the cashless society. We also have a jobless society in this country, and I'll tell you what the reason I'm saying it. We had a local dollar store open up. It's like the old 5 and dime store. So I'm speaking to the store manager. He created 8 full-time jobs at that store. Over 100 people applied, Michael, 40% college education, and get a load of this. They're applying online, so we don't see these people outside. But if, say, the dollar store said, okay, between the hours of 8 and 10, everybody apply, you will see lines outside the store for the jobs, just like the Great Depression. So you're right. Cashless society, we also got a jobless society here.
Well, we know that there are something like 94 million Americans willing and able to work who have not been able to find jobs for years, and they're just simply not being counted by the government to come up with their official unemployment figure of 5.6%, which actually represents the number of people who lost their jobs in the last however long the period is that they've set, the period where you can still claim some kind of benefits.
Oh, you're right. Macy's is laying off. You have Walmart closing down. And what's Washington's answer? Well, bring more people in. Lift visa restrictions for HB1 visas. Oh, bring more illegals in. Oh, we got to make them citizens. Mike, those people are competing directly against Native American people.
They absolutely are. But from the money junkies, these people are going to be willing to work less. And we're seeing the same thing in Europe, where the IMF has actually said, let the migrants work for below the minimum wage and everything will be fine. And what every one of these money junkies seems to have forgotten or doesn't want to think about is unless there is a way for the wealth accumulated at the top to be recycled down to the bottom in decent wages and salaries for the workers, they're not going to go to the shopping malls and buy whatever it is you're trying to sell and feed that money back into the system. And that's the part that's missing. That's the part that fascism ultimately destroys, is that recycling mechanism.
Excellent points, Michael. Very, very valid points you're bringing up. And this is one of the biggest problems we have with our economy today is that the job loss, livable wage is destroyed. No jobs for, you said the right, 94 million Americans willing to work, can't find work. And Washington's answer is, well, bring more people in and make a sub-minimum wage. But you know what that's going to turn us into? It's going to turn us into the third world country that we feared most. And
well, we're already well on our way. We're already well on our way.
You're right. I'm sorry. Very good, Michael. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. We're going to let you go. Now, getting on to the political candidates, the polls are once again shifting away from Ted Cruz, who cannot hold the office of president, and shifting back to Donald Trump. So Ted Cruz has decided he's going to be controversial to try and get his name on media, and he came out with a comment, Democrats commit most violent crimes, implying that if you are a Democrat, you are naturally disposed toward being a criminal. So obviously, Philly.com went out and did a little fact-checking and said, no, it's a complete misrepresentation. Now, there is a causal relationship because most rich people tend to be Republican, most poor people tend to be Democrat. When the rich people commit crimes, it's covered up, white-collar crime. When the poor people commit crimes, it's headline news to keep us all scared and dependent on the government. But it's absurd. Ted Cruz also came out and said rape went up significantly after Australia passed their gun control law. And that's complete, utter nonsense. Cruz is trying to basically connect with the gun rights people, and that's all well and good, but you don't do it by coming out with completely bogus claims. Now, my concerns notwithstanding, Sarah Palin's support of Trump is having a positive effect. Cruz dropped from 16.3% down to 10.5% before and after Palin's announcement. During the same period of time, Trump's national numbers rose from 33% to over 40%. Somebody tried to start a Facebook rumor that Sarah Palin is going to be Donald Trump's vice president. I know Trump is not stupid enough to make the same mistake that John McCain did. We're going to grab ourselves a phone call here. Bernard in Canada, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, hi, good morning, Mike. I just wondered if you had heard about the Canadian journalist in Israel that took a round from a soldier there while she was filming some of the, measures they use to control crowds. They put out this skunk, they call it, some kind of obnoxious thing that they spray on people.
Yes.
Now, somebody wondered why Prime Minister Trudeau hadn't said anything. Well, I think part of it might be because there's somebody that saved his bacon financially. Like, the thinking was that the Harper government would have enough money to run over the others, but Trudeau got Stephen Brockman to do his fundraising and help him out, and it seemed to help quite a bit because he ended up having enough budget and won the election. But the thing is, not only is the Prime Minister not saying anything, and the opposition are even less likely to say anything. So there's really nobody to speak for Canada. But that was
we went through the same thing. We went through the same thing with the Mavi Marmara. The IDF grabbed these ships in international waters. They shot and killed. They murdered 8 people, one of them a U.S. citizen from New York, and our government said nothing about it.
What do you think if President Kennedy was still around, how he would have handled it?
President Kennedy took a very hard line against Israel. He was adamant they not be allowed to obtain nuclear weapons, and it appears that Israel was one of many players in the assassination of the president.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that there was an issue, but there was Professor Hall in Alberta says that the Kennedy administration actually helped the regime change in Canada because the progressive conservative Prime Minister Diefenbaker was so adamant at not accepting nuclear weapons, which is kind of the exact opposite of his issue with Israel, but he refused, and as a result, they had a change of government. But in our country, before this aberration under Harper, we had progressive conservatives that were actually just as liberal as the liberals. So when they kicked him out, they brought in Prime Minister Pearson, who was actually grabbed and assaulted by Johnson after he criticized his Vietnam speech. Apparently he could be pretty rough. But we didn't have the kind of toadyism and neo-fascists and neocons and that we had under the Harper government. I think it might be different now, but anyway.
Well, I don't know. I mean, right now, the player in all these countries is very clearly Israel. And the good news is, of course, Israel has gone so over the top in thumping its chest to prove that it rules the world, that everybody in the world now sees it, and they're not very comfortable with it. They're not comfortable with the idea of Israel calling the shots around the globe, especially when they see how Israel treats the lower classes in their own country. They don't want to have that, we don't all want to be treated the way the Palestinians are, although more and more it is starting to happen within our own country. Anyway, listen, Bernard, thank you very much. I've got to let you go. We're going to grab Will in Cincinnati real quick before the commercial break. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, was that a Zero Hedge report where they were talking about all the ships reported right now? Have you heard anything about that?
I'm saying all of what reported?
All ships that are at port right now. There's nothing moving anything.
Somebody misread the marks. There are ships moving, but it is at an all-time low. There are still some ships underway, but there are a huge number of ships that are just riding at anchor. We know that the Baltic Dry Index is down, shipping index is down, rail index is down. We're seeing all these retail operations are going belly up. The economy is locking up because there isn't enough currency in circulation at the lower levels for the economy to actually function. Because the money junkies have grabbed it all to themselves, and they won't let go of any of it. And our politicians are totally on the side of the money junkies, and they're trying to create a whole new nation and economy that's just centered on that 1%, and hoping the rest of us will just go away and die someplace, and leave lots of nice wide open space for them to build a new utopia on.
Yeah, like you said, they didn't have a plan for what to do when it worked.
That's exactly right. They again, lack of analysis, lack of foresight. Will, I got to let you go. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about the race for the White House. Marco Rubio has scaled back his advertising in both Iowa and New Hampshire. The writing is on the wall. He's not going to do well there at all. He's whining and crying that the media is spending too much time on his minor transgressions as a small kid, which is absolutely right. It's far more important to pay attention to two things: his history of financial recklessness and the fact that Marco Rubio, like Ted Cruz, does not qualify as a natural-born American citizen able to sit in the White House. Now, Jeb Bush, who started out the presumptive GOP nominee, is in serious trouble. He's down in single digits. Now he's getting desperate. He's getting his mother to join him on the campaign trail. Not quite the mistake that Hillary did getting Bill out there, but it actually is going to make him look a little more pathetic, I think. You know, Mom, come save my campaign here. All right, we're going to grab a couple of phone calls. Bob in Colorado. Aloha, Bob. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, I want to talk about the financial collapse, and I had a question. I mean, not that you're a mind reader or what goes on, but what do you really think is going to happen if they really do pull the plug with all these just millions of people here in this country that once the plug is pulled, no more money, they can't pay their mortgage, they can't pay their taxes, they can't pay anything anymore. How do you think that's really going to come down? Do you think the government's going to come around enough people, or how's that going to work, do you think?
Well, I don't see anybody pulling the plug. The problem is they can't keep the plug in there any longer because private central banking is an inherently unstable system. It has no natural stability. They try and control it and ride it to maximize the harvest from the people. But at some point, there's going to be an equities crash. There's going to be a derivatives crash, and it's not like they'll make all the dollars disappear. The dollars just won't be worth anything. But you know, you're still going to be able to take those worthless dollars over to your bank and say, look, this is what we agreed to the mortgage. Go ahead and take it. What we're going to see happen, of course, is the collapse of the banks, the financial system, and the U.S. government itself. The American people are going to say, okay, time to hit the reset button. We're going to come up with our own community currencies to get us through this crisis until we set up a new government with a little more common sense. And rule number 1 will be no more private central banks. Rule number 2, no more private central banks. Rule number 3, no more private central banks, and we'll work out the rest of the details later. But that's where we're really headed. And the reality is that the U.S. government does not have the military assets necessary to come on out and grab all of us and shake those last few coins out of our pocket, because in the crash happens, they're not going to be able to pay their own troops. They're not going to be able to pay for the logistical support to go on out there, and you're going to probably find most rank and file military are going to turn on the government.
All right, so if you are in a good location then, and if they, say, take away people's 401k, retirement, Social Security and all that, they just say, that's it, no more, we don't have any more money. Then if you are in the right position to be, you can actually survive through this.
I think we're all going to survive. And again, the recent historical template I like to use is the collapse of the Soviet Union, where the government simply grew to a position where they destroyed their own credibility with the Russian people, and it simply fell apart. And the Russian people had about, a tough 4 months of having to get by, taking care of each other, while they formed the new Russian republics. And life under the Russian republics overall is considerably better than it was under the former Soviet Union. We're going to go through the same thing here. The system is hopelessly out of balance. It needs a rebalancing. And the people in charge don't want that to happen because, they're on the positive end of the imbalance and they don't want to let go because they're addicts. They're acting like addicts. They don't think clearly. They're not aware of the damage their addiction is causing to society. All they can see is that next fix, the next pile of cash, the next pile of gold coins. That's their entire consciousness. If you've ever known somebody who was an addict, whether it was meth or alcohol or heroin or whatever you can get addicted to, if you've ever seen addictive behavior up close, you will see it looks just like what you see on the faces of those people all over Wall Street and Washington, D.C.
Well, you know what? You made a great point about Russia, and that is that was an awesome point, and thank you so much. It was a wonderful show.
All right, thank you very much here. We're going to switch over here to Toenail in Canada. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, how's it going?
Going fine.
Great, awesome. Yeah, I'm a long-time listener and a first-time caller. I just want to talk to you about predictive programming.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, first of all, I want to thank you for what you do for the truth movement. Like, I sense there's a mass awakening going on. It seems like the truth has gone mainstream.
Yeah, it is. Well, it's not that the truth has gone mainstream. It's just that the independent media is now the mainstream. We have the lion's share of the audience and readership and viewership, and that's why I call the other guys the corporate media. They're not the mainstream anymore. We are. We're the high ground in the war for the minds of America.
Yeah, I've been noticing, truth hidden in plain sight. Like, one example, I don't know if you catch it yesterday, the X-Files, the premiere. I missed it. I meant to tune into it, but I missed it. Sorry. Yeah, it seems like they're mixing truth with fiction. In this predictive programming, just to condition us psychologically for the changes and agendas that they want us to implement, you know what I mean? Well, I understand where you're coming from, but at this particular point, most people are convinced that predictive programming is about as effective as subliminal advertising, which is to say it's not really effective at all. And it's another one of those pop culture psychology buzzwords to try and imply that, we're not in control of our own minds. And yes, having come out of advertising, I'm aware of how it's possible to manipulate the human mind, but there's no absolute control to do that. You're just going for the majority of people who fall for whatever your sales pitch is. But the concept of predictive programming, it sounds really good, but there's no evidence to support that it's any more effective than subliminal advertising. Which doesn't mean the ad agencies aren't going to charge huge fees by promising that your commercial or your political spot will use predictive programming, because that's what they did with subliminal advertising. One example I want to touch on is the programming of this TV show called The Lone Gunman that aired on the March in 2001. It was about the premise of the show was a government operation of hijacking airliners and slamming into the towers, and to blame it on the terrorists and start a fake war on terror. Do you remember? Do you remember the novel 7 Days of the Condor, which was then reduced down to 3 Days of the Condor, the movie with Robert Redford and Faye Dunaway? And the idea was basically that the CIA had this shop that did nothing but look through the popular media for ideas that might prove useful in the long run. So rather than the lone gunman being some kind of exotic predictive programming, maybe somebody at the CIA looked at that and said, this is in the pop culture. This is going to have the maximum psychological effect if we do this. Yeah, it's not much coincidence, And it was hardly original with the lone gunman. There were government studies about, terrorist attacks involving the World Trade Towers. It was on the literally cover illustration on a couple of the pamphlets that were being put out. It wasn't really an out-of-this-world idea. The World Trade Center was a major symbol of America's capitalist hegemony, and that did make it a target for a lot of people. Yeah. Okay. I think it's coincidence. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. All right. We're going to let you go here. We're coming up on the top of the hour and our commercial break here. Let's see. Karl Rove has now come on out and reassured us all that Hillary doesn't have brain damage. Originally, he was saying there's an issue. Now, I guess he got the phone call and he said, no, Hillary Clinton does not have brain damage. I think we just found Hillary Clinton's new campaign slogan. We're going to make up little buttons that say, Hillary Clinton, she doesn't have brain damage. Actually, I put a graphic of that on the front page of WhatReallyHappened.com. But Hillary's in trouble. I mean, they're reactive. They're defensive. No, she doesn't have brain damage. No, she didn't steal classified information. No, she wasn't selling that classified information to other government. She's totally defensive at this point. She's lost any initiative trying to connect with her potential voters. And she's in serious, serious trouble. When we get on back, we're going to talk about more details because there's been yet another major revelation about Hillary's email and the presence of classified documents on her private server. More importantly, how they had to have gotten there because of the way the classified document systems are set up. We'll be back with hour number 3 after our top of the hour news break.
Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. Daniel is in our control room, hand hovering over the telephone. Things just got a lot worse for Hillary Clinton. Now, to get you caught up to date, last week it came out that some of the emails on her private, unsecured server were classified above top secret, category called Special Access Programs. So secret that the congressional investigators had to be granted additional clearances just to read this stuff. And here's where it gets very interesting right now. There is no way those documents should have been on Hillary's private server. And the reason is that the government, in order to protect its classified information, maintains private networks. It's in a tiered system. Now, the lowest level system is called the Non-Classified Internet Protocol Router Network. Okay, you can email from this low-level network to the outside of the government. Okay, for documents that are classified up to top secret, okay, they have another one called the Secret Internet Protocol Router Network. And then above that one, there's another one, the Joint Worldwide Intelligence Communications System, which is for the top secret and above. These last two networks are not connected to the unclassified system. You cannot send email from them. You cannot connect to the outside world from them. This is where the top secret special access programs information was being kept. So the only way it could get to be on Hillary Clinton's unsecured server is somebody copied it onto a flash drive and walked it over to a system where it could then be transmitted to Hillary's server. There is no legitimate way for these documents to be on Hillary Rodham Clinton's server. Some of these classified documents contain information from human spying. This kind of information from HUMINT is always handled very delicately, because you might publish something or put something out there that would allow a foreign government to identify your spy and put them to death, or at least kick them out of the country. And Hillary had some of that. Now, only last week, the Wall Street Journal was saying the Clinton email scandal justifies criminal charges against Hillary Rodham Clinton. And Hillary has put the FBI in a serious, serious bind. Because with all that has come on out, the FBI has to recommend prosecution, or they're going to destroy their own credibility in the eyes of the majority of the Americans, those who still think the FBI actually has credibility. And lying behind that, with the revelation that documents were literally copied off the secure server and hand-carried, cut and paste onto Hillary's server, again, goes back to that question I have been asking all along. Is this a repeat of the Clintons' 1996 Chinagate scandal? U.S. secrets being sold to foreign governments and the charitable foundation used to collect and launder the payments? That is a question that has to be asked. And all I can say right now to Hillary Clinton is, don't feel too bad, because Nelson Mandela didn't get to be president until after he served 27 years in prison. So you're on your way. You're on that presidential path. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call. Matus in Vancouver, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael, you're making me laugh again.
Okay, good.
Yeah, my girlfriend's Russian. She's not paying too much attention to what's going on with American politics, and I described the scandal that you're just talking about with Hillary Clinton, and her reaction was, "Oh, she's a spy."
Oh,
and so just interesting from that outside perspective. You don't need much information. It doesn't take much information to come to that conclusion. And she said that like this was months ago before everyone was talking about it, and so I was like, that actually was one of the first times that I thought of it that way.
Well, again, the Clintons' past history is certainly consistent with that idea. And now, first of all, the revelation previously that Hillary ordered her subordinates to strip classified markings from a document so it could be sent to her unsecure, that's a felony right there. That is a felony right there. And now the revelation that the documents found on her server, there's no electronic way for them to have gotten there because of these private secured government servers, which are firewalled against the entire outside wall. Can't send email, can't do FTP, can't do any of that stuff. All they do is store and organize the documents. That's all they do.
I don't know how you could cook a goose any more than that.
Well, I'm going to go on, with the basting tool and just... Okay.
Hey, one last thing real quick. Yesterday I read an article from ABC News refuting that Hillary has brain damage, and it's in regards to a doctor a number of months ago who said that he believes that she had some brain damage from a fall. So this article is refuting it, and so I recommend that we use this information and to formulate Hillary's new campaign slogan. Should be Hillary 2016. She doesn't have brain damage.
Well, that's exactly what I was saying before, and I got a button that illustrates that on the front page of WhatReallyHappened.com. Great minds think alike. What can I tell you? Anyway,
Hillary.
I need to...
Hillary. She doesn't have brain damage.
Yeah, well, I think she does because of the double vision issue. And
I know. It's so funny to have to qualify it, though.
Yeah. All right, well, listen, I got to let you go because we're running out of time, and I got a lot of stuff to cover. Now, last Friday, as the huge piles of human-caused global warming were setting records all over the eastern seaboard, the State Department said they needed a 1-month extension before the next release of Hillary emails. The storm is already over. They're going to have the streets cleared by Wednesday, but the State Department used it as an excuse to try and push back the deadline for the next email release an additional month. Now, reporter Jason Leopold has filed a motion with the court saying that delay of the release of any more of this information, any kind of extension, would cause irrevocable harm to the process of finding out what the heck has been going on. And maybe the court is going to realize how ridiculous it is arguing for a 1-month delay on the basis of 3 days of heavy snow. Hillary Clinton is out there trying to defend her $200,000 speaking fees from big banks by saying, well, they were really interested on the raid that got bin Laden. They wanted to hear it right from me, and they were willing to pay $200,000 to hear the story from me. I wonder how much they'd be willing to pay me to hear what actually happened and how that wasn't Osama bin Laden at Abbottabad. Okay, moving on down here. You know something? I'm going to skip on down and get into this major storm that we had here. Snowzilla. This is the biggest snow on record ever in Baltimore. It's in the top 5 of Washington, D.C. Major storm happened. Human-caused global warming just pouring out of the sky, snarling traffic. It was absolutely amazing. And they changed its name from Winter Storm Jason to Snowzilla. Major thing. In fact, it's so cold outside in Washington, D.C., I saw a politician with his hands in his own pockets. Refreshing change there. At least 30 people were killed in this storm, and that's not counting all the homeless who froze to death that they're not going to find until the spring thaw next year. Schools and government offices are closed in Washington. They're calling it the storm of a generation. 8,500 flights canceled, hundreds of cars stranded overnight, 2 feet of snow in Washington, D.C., 10 inches in Manhattan. 85 million people were told to shelter in place. More when we get back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and we're seeing a lot of pictures starting to show up from people all over the area that got hit by Snowzilla. 10 states declared emergencies, 8,500 flights canceled, coastal flooding in New Jersey. And down in Kentucky, the snow resulted in a 35-mile-long traffic jam that took 12 hours to clear, with the National Guard having to take in food, water, and fuel. It was absolutely epic. One for the record books. Now, there was some bright moments. I'm looking at some of these pictures here. People were enjoying the snow, which, yeah, that's what it's there for if it's not a danger to you. Apparently, residents of Washington, D.C. went sledding on the steps of the Capitol building. Sleds, inflatable mattresses, inner tubes, finally something positive from Capitol Hill. It's a good thing here. Now, not too surprisingly, the corporate media was kind of trying to reconcile all this snow and cold and with, 2015 was the hottest year on record, and it wasn't all that bad. And the media was putting out the story that there was only 17 inches of snow at the Washington, D.C. airport. And everyone was saying, no, it's much worse than that. What are you saying? Well, it turns out, according to an article in no less than the Washington Post, that over at the airport, they decided to just throw out the normal way of measuring snow. Just wait till it was over, stick in a yardstick, and get the result. Now, the way you measure snowfall, as recommended by the National Weather Service, you use something called a snowboard. Now, as the name implies, it's just a board. You put it on the ground, and every 6 hours you will come and take a measurement of how deep the snow is. Then you'll dust off the board and start all over again. And the reason you do that is because as snow accumulates above a certain level, obviously the lower snow is going to get compacted down. So waiting until the very end of the storm and sticking a yardstick in there, you're not going to get an accurate number. You're going to get a number that is lower than what really happened. This is more cheating by the carbon Nazis, trying to say, it wasn't all that big here. Over in New York, they broke their snowfall record during this snowstorm, and they're not the only ones. In effect, martial law got declared in New York City. They literally told the residents that you will stay inside. If we see you outside, you will be arrested. They didn't enforce it. There was this wonderful video out there of somebody with a snowboard being towed by a four-wheel drive car through the street. They were having fun, skiing, all that stuff. They're having a good time here. Over in New Jersey, they are still underwater from the storm. In fact, the residents of the coast of New Jersey are trying to get to Governor Christie saying that this storm was actually worse than Storm Sandy. Major flooding, because apparently after Storm Sandy, they still didn't clean out those storm drains so the water could run off. Cold snap has hit East Asia. Deaths reported in Japan and Taiwan. Coldest in 44 years. 85 people died in Taiwan of the cold. Over in Japan, 50 killed, 60,000 stranded. See, this isn't just happening here in the United States. This is all over the Northern Hemisphere. Great Britain has a major snowstorm coming down on them right now. Lebanon had a lot of their mountain roads completely blocked by snow. They're finally starting to get those opened up. This isn't just local or regional. In fact, I actually got an email from somebody when I was using the image of the website from the UK Independent, March 20th, 2000, which had the headline, "Snowfalls are now a thing of the past," and somebody wrote in and said, well, really, you shouldn't refer to that because that was really just for Great Britain. They were saying that snowfalls are a thing of the past in Great Britain. Well, it still doesn't matter. They had that harsh winter of 2009, and it looks like they're going to get another one. Now, as you know, NASA and NOAA are out there insisting 2015 was the hottest year on record, ocean temperatures are up, blah, 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 blah. And everybody's wondering, what the heck is going on? And it's been a bit of a fight to get NOAA to come on out with how they arrived at this information. They were trying to stall Congress. Then Judicial Watch came in with a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit, at which point NOAA started sending information to Congress. And as it turns out, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration decided to throw out the satellite readings, which weren't showing warming, and started basing their ocean temperature conclusions on temperature measurement of what are called the water intake tubes of ocean-going vessels. Because vessels in the ocean, the engines need to be cooled, just like your car going down the street, but they don't use air. They'll take in seawater, cool the engines with it, spit the seawater back out. And they are monitoring the temperature of the water coming into the intake tube to make sure the tube isn't going to freeze or something else. And that works fine for the ocean-going ships. But the problem is ships themselves are sources of heat. And it conducts through the ship's structure. These intake tubes are located in the engine room, which is a very, very warm place. And this is how NOAA came up claiming to have data showing that global warming was continuing. There was no pause. Huzzah, 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 huzzah. They're fudging the data. Because without a carbon tax, the U.S. government is out of money. They didn't get the windfall from Obamacare. They're out of money. And they're borrowing without control, which means instant out of thin air money. They can't keep that up. Sooner or later, the dollar is going to crash. Now, I want to talk about the situation over in Flint, and as it turns out, other cities. This should anger every single American, certainly all the parents. Paul Krugman is out there saying that the poisoning of Flint, Michigan's water was no accident. It was the result of corruption and politics. It turns out that back when the suggestion was made to save money by disconnecting Flint from the Detroit water system and just sucking the water out of the Flint River, a special commission appointed by Governor Rick Snyder said, no, don't do this. It's toxic, it's salty, it's going to corrode the pipes, it's going to leach lead into the water. And the governor's office overruled the recommendation and approved the plan. Because money is more important than human life. Now, we're talking about lead leaching out of these pipes, permanently impairing children's brains. To differing degrees. Some are really obvious. I mean, this whole thing came to light because a doctor in Flint, Michigan was seeing a lot more brain-damaged children with high lead content and apparently spent $147,000 documenting this before the government would actually admit it was going on. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're talking about the Flint water scandal, and it is a scandal. Because we now know that when the plan was suggested to disconnect Flint from the Detroit water system and just suck water out of the Flint River, a special commission appointed by the state governor said, this is a bad idea. This is going to hurt people. And the governor went ahead and did it anyway to save money, because money is more important than people in Flint, Michigan. Now, there's an article over at the New Yorker talking about the contempt that poisoned Flint's water, because the people of Flint have been complaining about this for a long time. And they were coming into meetings with jars of water that were yellow and brown and full of particulates. And the official response of the Flint government and the Michigan government was, we certify the water is safe to drink. We've never made any promises regarding its aesthetic quality. We never claimed it would be clear. We never claimed it would taste good. We're just guaranteeing it's safe to drink. Now we know they were lying, and they knew they were lying to the people. Now, we want to talk a little bit about water itself. Water is very important. 3/4 of the surface of Earth is water. If you are an adult, 60% of your body is made up of water. Health experts say you should be drinking roughly half a gallon of water every day, pure water with nothing else in it. And most people are going to their taps to get that water. They can't afford to go to the supermarket and buy a half gallon of Nestle's water every single day for every single person in their house. It's unrealistic. Now, Flint is leaping into action. They're going to rewrite the water testing directions, which isn't going to solve anything. Michigan Attorney General Bill Shute is appointing an ex-prosecutor and Detroit's former FBI chief to join the investigation to create a conflict wall between the state probe and all the lawsuits that are starting to pile on up. So they're circling the political wagons. They're more concerned with keeping their phony baloney jobs than actually getting safe, healthy drinking water. And the city of Flint is still demanding the citizens pay their water bills. They're even threatening some of the people that if they don't pay for this poison water coming out of their taps, their children could be taken away. Which shows you just how desperate for money the government is at this point. Now, here's where it gets a little more damning. The British press is reporting, the UK Guardian says they are in possession of documents showing that every major U.S. city east of the Mississippi is underreporting the presence of heavy metals in its water. Now remember, this lead permanently damages the brains of your children. Common Core finishes them off. As a result of this, and knowing that the government cannot be trusted, people are starting to buy their own water lead testing kits. They're not that expensive. They're about $50, $60. I found a whole bunch of them over at Amazon. Any survivalist store is going to have this. You should get this and test your water right now. And we are getting reports already. Some of the neighborhoods in New Orleans, Boston, New York, and Baltimore have lead content levels pretty much the same as Flint does. 25% of the children in Flint show dangerous levels of lead toxicity. Doctors are saying every single child in Flint ought to be treated as if they've been poisoned. But there really isn't anything you can do. There's no cure for lead poisoning. There's no way to take the damage back. It's permanent. Detroit's water is becoming too toxic to drink. Up in Ohio, a town called Sebring, about 60 miles south of Cleveland, did some testing and issued an advisory. Showed elevated levels of copper and lead above the EPA standards. Out in California, of course, they're filing a lawsuit trying to stop Nestle from sucking water out of drought-plagued California. They're doing it on an expired license. The license cost them just a few $100s. They're sucking out the water from the one remaining clean aquifer, putting it in bottles, putting it in the supermarket shelves for $2 a pop. And they shouldn't be allowed to do it. They're still doing it. They're going to drag it out in court and go on sucking the water out and bottling it. Because remember, it was not too long ago where the CEO of the Nestle Corporation said water is not a human right. All water on earth should be the property of corporations and sold as a product. And if you have money, you can drink safe, clean water. And if you don't, too bad. I want to look at the donor records of all these politicians who did this to the people of Flint, Michigan, New Orleans, Boston, Baltimore, Boston, Sebring, and find out how many of them are getting campaign donations from Nestle. Because it almost looks like they're working hand in glove to remove the availability of safe drinking water so that you have to go to the supermarket and buy this much more expensive water, which in some cases, despite the label saying mountain spring water, it's just more filtered tap water. And yes, the filtering will take out the coloration, but it can't get the recycled pharmaceuticals. That's another big problem with our water supply. People are dosing up on prescription medicines. They go to the bathroom. That water goes to the treatment plant and comes right back to the tap. None of the water treatment plants can deal with that particular problem. Now, back to the Declaration of Independence. One of the inalienable rights of man declared in the Declaration of Independence is life. It's right there along with liberty and pursuit of happiness, which was a last-minute substitution for property. Now, if one of the inalienable rights of man is life, that must obviously include the necessities to maintain that life, of which water is the most fundamental. Now, the UK Guardian says they have documents that major cities east of the Mississippi are underreporting heavy metal content of their drinking water. That doesn't necessarily mean west of the Mississippi is off the hook. They only have documents for the eastern part of the country. You need to get together with your friends and neighbors and say, all right, we're all going to chip in $10 and get a water testing kit and find out for yourself. We are living under a government that decided it was better to spend your tax dollars on propping up Wall Street, propping up Israel in wars of conquest, and decided really they couldn't afford to spend any of your tax dollars on making sure that you have safe, clean drinking water for yourself and your children. And they are literally allowing your children's brains to be permanently damaged to save a few bucks. Does that sound like good government to you? It doesn't to me. And in the larger picture of a government that is shoving GMOs at us, mandating vaccines which are ineffective and harmful, this is just part of the pattern. Whatever it takes to make money, we're going to do that. Poison the water supply to save a few bucks? Yeah, sure, that's business as usual. But everybody who's a parent in any one of those cities has to look at their child, especially those that are showing symptoms of brain damage and impaired development, and realize this wasn't an act of the imaginary playmate in the sky. It wasn't the luck of the draw. It wasn't bad genes. It wasn't their being poor parents. Their government did this to their children for a few dollars. This makes me furious when I think about it. Our government kept saying our children's our future. It's all for the children. No, you're poisoning our children to make a fast buck. Shame on you. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Final segment of our program this Monday, and we've shut off the phone lines here. I'm going to try and get through a few more of these talking points. Up in Oregon, the standoff is continuing. The Grant County Sheriff is mediating between the two groups and is saying that the Patriots are willing to basically surrender the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge if the Hammonds are released from prison. Now, this is a very reasonable request for them to make, because this all began with a brush fire, and the law under which they were sent back to prison for 5 years is a law intended to punish terrorists. And these two guys are obviously not terrorists. There was a wildfire coming across the land. They started a backfire to stop it, which succeeded. But in the process, some Bureau of Land Management land got scorched. That's it. It is at worst an accident. And the Bureau of Land Management came on down with this terror law to lock these guys up for 5 years so the ranch will go out of business and they can buy it. That's what's going on. So we're all hoping cooler heads will prevail. But frankly, it is within the authority of the governor of Oregon, I think, and certainly within the authority of Barack Obama to issue a pardon on these two people. And if they do, that'll calm the situation down. If they don't, it only reinforces that the issue is not the people, but grabbing the land. Somebody wants that land and its mineral resources to sell, to lease, to pledge as collateral. We're seeing it all over the country. The mindset of the government at all levels, down to the city of Flint, Michigan. Grabbing money has become more important than taking care of the people. Meanwhile, let's see, a story coming out of LiveLeak.com, cop sentenced to 5 years in prison. It's another one of these cases where the cop pulls somebody over, the situation gets out of control. The cop said, oh, he tried to grab my gun, he tried to do this, he tried to do that. And he was contradicted by a dash cam video. Now, the video from the officer's car was damaged, malfunctioned, but fortunately there was a second police vehicle there. All charges have been dropped against the man who was pulled over. This police officer is going to prison for 5 years. Over in Wisconsin, a former police officer there has pled guilty to murdering 2 women and stuffing their bodies into suitcases and dumping them on a rural road. One of the women was from Oregon. Big stinking case. Up in Canada, there's a big scandal going on there over their radar, the police radar that they use to write out speeding tickets, because the radars are supposed to be tested. And they test it with a very reliable device. It's a tuning fork. Kind of hard to mess with that. And they're supposed to test these radars on a regular interval, very often at the beginning of every patrol, to make sure the radar guns are accurate. And they've discovered there's a lot of cities in Canada where they just stopped testing. And the radars have gone out of adjustment, and people are being given speeding tickets that don't really deserve them. And according to Toronto lawyer Daniel Baker, this is a huge fraud being perpetrated by the Canadian police on the Canadian people, just like we're seeing here in the U.S. They're down to pillaging their own population to try and stay solvent. Very alarming statistic coming out of PatriotRising.com. 95% of all inmates in American prisons have never received a trial. 95%. There is no more due process. They arrest you, they declare you guilty, they claim you've made a plea bargain or something, and they lock you away. 95% of people in American prisons have never had their day in court, never had a trial. Down in South Carolina, there was an owner of a barber shop, was just dealing with his customers. Two guys walked in with guns demanding money. Fortunately, the barber carries concealed and shot the would-be robber dead. Another one over in Tampa, Florida. Convenience store clerk shoots an armed robber. Shot him in the head. He's in the hospital in critical condition. And, yeah, that's why we should be allowed to have firearms, to stop crime, because the police cannot do it. In fact, as those earlier examples showed, the police have become bigger criminals than the criminals. They certainly steal more from Americans than the regular criminals through civil forfeiture, and they have murdered more innocent Americans than mass shooters and terrorists combined. What an upside-down, topsy-turvy society we have become. Now, the latest piece of propaganda that has come on out about ISIS, there's a new ISIS video message. We're coming to get you. We're doing this. We're doing that. And they scrolled an encrypted message on the video claiming it's a message going out in PGP to their assets and the rest of the world. Immediately, the FBI said, see, this is why we have to ban PGP. Edward Snowden waded in and pointed out that the message is a fake. The ID for the encryption key has the wrong number of characters, and the starting date of the ISIS operation mentioned in the message is 3 days earlier than the creation of the key that encrypted it. It's just more booga booga, ISIS coming to get you, encryption is bad, encryption is bad. Now, there's another law coming on out. This is being considered over in, let's see, where was that? I didn't get the city. Anyway, the gist of it is, politicians are proposing a bill that would require computer workers, especially those who make house calls, those who do computer repair, if they're working on a computer and they see child pornography, they are required to report it. If they fail to do so, they face a stiff prison sentence. And this is a real tough one to call, because you know how I feel about child sexual exploitation. But on the other hand, it's an invasion of privacy. Of course, anybody who's dumb enough to have that kind of stuff on their computer when they're sending it in for service, maybe they deserve to go to jail. It's an interesting one. Over at Twitter, Jack Dorsey has confirmed the resignation of 4 top company officials. People are starting to abandon Twitter. The novelty has worn off. Right now it's jammed up by all these automated Twitter things for advertisers and political campaigns, and people are just tuning out. There's too much volume coming in. You can't just sit there and read it all, so people are turning it off. Their ad revenues are in decline. The model is no longer working. Sainsbury's Bank, their web pages have come under severe criticism because they're using outdated cryptography from the last century. It's wide open to intrusion. These are crypto systems that are known to be compromised. And finally, over in the European Union, they've opened their new counterterrorism center, where they're going to spy on you and make sure you're not thinking double plus ungood thoughts. Have you noticed we're starting to get into a kind of a pre-crime mentality? And it was kind of good that the movie Minority Report is making the rounds again. But it almost seems like law enforcement is getting totally absorbed into their computerized predictive toys to the point where they're not out on the streets dealing with real crime. Law enforcement has gone virtual, and they're like playing this very expensive computer game of who might be a criminal to the point where they're ignoring those who are actually out there committing crimes. I think somebody needs to sort of be slapped upside of the head and say, hey, how about we all get back to the real world? Okay. Here's a bizarre article. This came out of The Guardian. Europe is in crisis. Once more, America will have to step in and save us. From refugees to security to Brexit, Europeans cannot take care of themselves. The U.S. has been indifferent, blah, blah, blah. What it is, this is a call from Great Britain for the U.S. to repeat the Marshall Plan, which was when the U.S. picked up the tab to rebuild Europe after World War II. And now they want us to fix the mess again. But the U.S. doesn't have the resources. We're on the verge of collapse ourselves. There's the music. Time for me to get on out of here. I got to do Jim Goddard up in Vancouver. We'll be back tomorrow here on GCN. Until then, aloha, America.